Good morning. Today is February the 14th, actually Valentine's Day 2022. I want to share what I think to be three important keys. Jesus told the disciples after Peter had come up with the revelation from God as to who he was, that he was giving them the keys to the kingdom. Keys represent access places or access points. So when I think about the various keys, I think of three important keys. I mean, they're all important, but three important keys in particular as it has to do with the survival and continuation of any ministry that considers itself a part of the ambassadorship of the kingdom. It has to do with your youth, your income, and your moral status. Those three things are most important. Of course, the income goes without saying. There seems to be a growing class of people who think it's not important to return money to ministry. And it appears to them that that's an Old Testament idea, not necessary in the New Testament. Of course, the problem with that is everything you do as a group at a location, be it owned or rented or leased, requires income, insurances, utilities, just the basic fundamental aspects of affording such a place. Because many say that the clergy should work, but we won't debate that point. Let's deal with the basics. Let's deal with just the basic needs. So for those individuals who have a problem with preachers and money, let's just imagine your idea of ministry without the clergy having any money coming to him or her. So now you have a building, you have people, you have services. How do you recommend we pay for those? Of course, there's this new thinking now because of the internet that you don't really need a building. And, for a while they've been crying against the four walls, and that's just a segue into not needing a building and a segue into not having to bring your money to a set place. That's kind of how that rolls out. But that's not the idea. When Jesus shows up to bring ministry, he does not tell them to dismantle the synagogues and to no longer have a central place of worship. That's just not how it was. As a matter of fact, God told David that Solomon would build his house. So God was always interested in a building. So I don't really get with that one. So that aside, let's imagine your idea of a building and a ministry without paying a preacher. Money is important. Consistency of tithing offering is necessary. Certainly in the Old Testament days, it was a different way of giving because the commerce was different. And as it may be in our day and time, we may go from the paper dollar to the Bitcoin to credits. So the way of giving does change over time because society changes, not because God. The need is still the same. You have to take care of the place. You have to afford the place. And in today's society, there's certain regulations that require you to have certain things like insurances for liability. So, you have to do things financially to make sure you can maintain the house that God said Solomon would build. That's important. So you need income. The second thing, of course, is the morality of the individuals within the set house. We must understand that even though we fall and we sin, we must always pursue a ministry that is as sin-free as possible. And this doesn't mean that we have to, call people out and put people on the spot or even judge them as harshly as many have done. But what it does mean is there must be an effort to pursue a standard of morality. That standard of morality is mentioned in scriptures. Many debate certain points of what we should and shouldn't do, but using the premise of the Ten Commandments, the most cleanest foundation of building morality rises from that. So thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. As it relates to relationship with God, no graven images to replace him. As it relates to sexuality, you should not covet your neighbor's wife. As to money, don't covet your finances, because the word finances is implicated in that idea as well when it talks about, his things. So it's important that we recognize that finances has to be in play. for the house of God to survive physically, that there's a named place. So now why is there a need for a named place? Because there's always a place of headquarters. You don't want it to be based on my square space in my house on the internet and your square space in your house based on the internet, because there aren't the central controls within your home that provide a sanctuary for the masses to come. So the purpose of the central gathering is to showcase God's house. That's your house. There's a place that should be named His house, in which things which are relative to what the scriptures speak of take place. And I think that's lost on many people as to the reason for the house. The house is there because that's the central place. So just imagine in any country, let's use this as an example. And you have, for instance, America, you have 50 states. So imagine that none of the states have a capital. Okay? Then imagine that the country does not have a capital. Now, how does that play out in your mind if we lived in a country where there was no capital? There were no main cities. It would be kind of strange, right? But the reality is those capitals are needed because they serve as a central gathering point for everything that blesses all the cities and towns. So you can't do without the capital. It's needed. And so is the central place of gathering in any city, in any state, because that represents that same concept. It's the place through which everything regarding the idea of the kingdom flows out from. So you have to have that. So it's important that we finance it, we maintain it, and I'll save the debate for the preacher later, because I want you to get this part for those who struggle with preachers making money. So let's just leave it at that for now. And of course, the third key, which is very, very important, is the key of making sure your young people, your youth, are replenished. If you don't replenish the house of God, then you'll soon die on the vine. Of course, the finances is the continuation of that replenishing that takes care of the physical. But what takes care of the spiritual is the physical idea of babies, of new seed. And so ministries that want to maintain must continue to replenish its youth population. You must always try to figure out ways on how to maintain them and how to sustain them and how to understand their seasons and generations so you can relate to them. Because that's the thing that I think is going to destroy many quality houses of worship. The fact that they are not spending time first replenishing the young people, and then of course equally they're not trying to understand their language. Now, you don't need to understand the language to try to be like them, but I think it's important you understand their language so you can understand how they might be seduced and how they might be prevented from maintaining a relationship with God because of what they're hearing in the world. There was a time when society echoed, at least in some semblance, the morality of the house of God, but that day is fastly slipping away, or it's being corrupted. And so we need to make sure we maintain some sense of consistency as it relates to an annual look at the youth in your ministry. That's so important. I can't overemphasize that enough. And you also need to think about this. Let me just segue and say this. You also need to pay attention at the other end, at the senior population, because the senior population really signals the need to replenish the youth population. As you see, your principal people moving off the scene, slowing down, not as, involved as they once were for legitimate reasons. You must make sure that you're bringing up the tail end, because when they're gone, then you lose several things. You lose the capacity of good sage instruction, because they could talk to the young people, they can explain things to them. You lose references. They can give them reference, they can give them history, and we know history means you have standing in your mind, so that's important. Of course, financially, they start fading, they move into senior state and their income isn't the same. You need to train and teach the young people how to do what they did. That is to be good tithers and bringing offerings into the house so that the building, because I know some of y'all have a problem with the preacher, so that the building can be taken care of, at least. And so it's important that you minister to your young people. I dare say that if you're not building your youth department, then your days on the vine are numbered. God said, upon this rock I will build my house, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. You say church, but house. And we failed to negotiate how the gates of hell will prevail against it. And two, what exactly constitutes the house. So, of course, the gates of hell prevail against it if the morality of the house is not sustained, because the intention of the gates of hell is to implode the house of God through the animal sinful nature of man. He's not going to come in here with a jackhammer and a wrecking ball and tear it down. He's going to use what you're about sinfully, carnally, to implode the spiritual structure, because his goal is not the physical, it's the spiritual. It's important that you recognize that. And the other thing that I think we don't negotiate in that text is the fact that your church is not the church, it's a ministry. We're not an organization, we're an organism with many parts, and the many parts represent ministry. So, your hands could fail, but the rest of your body still operates. So ministries are important, but they do not represent the church in and of itself. All of us make up the church or the kingdom. And so I always like to break that down. So we are ministries. So ministries will fail. Church will never fail. And as you know, they're doing it every day. They're closing shop. Those are ministries. If they were the church, then with the failing of one, then we'd be done, right? No, we still continue. So ministries will be sustained through its youth element. And it's important. If you do not sustain your youth element, pretty much the days of your ministry are numbered. You must also sustain them, not just through making sure you bring in new bodies, but sustain the faith, the principles that you've taught and that have been taught you. It's important that you do that, because if the principles that you've been taught dies, then your ministry dies. Every ministry has a mission. I believe the Lord empowers us with specific visions and goals, and they're not to build self, they're to build kingdom. And each has its own property. It is up to the shepherd to understand that, interpret that to the saints, that is, write it down and make it plain, so when they read it, they run. This is key. Make sure you build the children to understand what the faith is that you've contended for, and that they too must contend for, because should you create that relay, and that's the thing I like to style it as, over the years, you sustain parts of the kingdom of the church, the fingers, the toes, whatever part you represent, so that it is not handicapped by inoperable parts. That's very important. So these are three important keys to Yalla Stringer. With all that getting, get a good understanding.